People like to say things like question everything. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of a good thing to say. Are you qualified to ask the question? I'm not always sure of. And the thing is, what's the point of asking questions if you never accept an answer you're given? Lots of people ask lots of questions, but when you tell them, well, the data says this, science says this, we've discovered such and such, they say, you don't know, man. So I like to challenge assumptions, even my own. Of course, when I first saw the image of the polar bear that was starving and emaciated, and I saw the National Geographic headline, "Polar Bear Dies of Climate Change," basically. This is what climate change looks like. The face of climate change is a headline like that. Of course, I'm out here in the bush, so I don't have the ability to Google and see what it actually said, but you get the point. And here's a picture of this emaciated polar bear, and the idea being that because of sea ice loss, which is a real thing, the polar bears are in danger of going extinct or starving to death. And of course, there's reason to be concerned for this. The question is that particular bear, was it proven that climate change was why it was starving? And there's a lot of reasons why it's good to question that assumption. I think there's enough solid climate change science that we don't have to make things up. I don't think sensationalism is good. Our detractors they seem to be the kind of people that will look for any inconsistency in our arguments and exploit that and pretend like nothing else we say that was correct matters. So we end up having to be more precise than they are. They can say whatever they want. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. We have to be correct. And I mean, that's the problem with being on the side of truth is you have to question your own assumptions. So I questioned that assumption and I found out so far there's very little evidence of polar bears starving to death because of sea ice loss. Two things they found is that there are 11 factors that lead to polar bear starvation. There's been times in the past where the polar bears were noticeably emaciated. The 1980s seemed to be a period like that in which sea ice loss was not a problem in the 80s. I was alive then, I recall quite well. The other thing that is a mitigating factor is the fact that polar bears, tend to be on the move. There's examples of polar bears leaving Alaska and going over to Russia. There's polar bears ranging deeper inland and even mixing with grizzly bears, the grizzlars, and I guess they can breed together. So how the polar bear will adapt to climate change is still uncertain. There's good reason to be concerned for him, but we don't know that polar bear died from climate change. We just don't. It's not. And in a lot of cases where polar bears who did die of starvation, were assessed afterwards, mortuary style, they seem to find that there was physical problems with almost all of them that probably led to their starvation. We'll talk about that in a second. Of course, I don't have a great deal of personal experience with polar bears. My friend Joe Stover works those tours in Churchill, and the bears he saw this fall and that we put on, if you want to see that video, at the end of this video, I'll put it up there. Joe Stover talks about polar bears. And you see the bears in his video look very healthy, and that was after poor sea ice conditions in Hudson Bay last year, a long, very hot summer, and a very late start to sea ice this fall. And they were just starting to get out there when we last had that talk, Joe Stover and I, about that. So if you have questions, I'm sure Joe can help answer them. The thing about carnivores is they're the top of the food chain. So, how are they going to die? Think about this in the first place. Like a polar bear, nothing's going to kill it and eat it. It's not going to drown often. It's not going to fall off a cliff. There's not much of that there. I mean, there's not much that can actually kill. It's not going to freeze to death. They're fine with that. There's not much that can actually kill a polar bear. It's the top of the food chain. So you think about when polar bears end up dying of old age or getting old, getting cancers, it's quite likely that starving to death will end up being part of the process of their death. Some of the conditions that may lead to these things, for young bears, it could be something like they don't know how to hunt yet. They just really haven't figured it out. Polar bears, like their hunting style, it's not something you can just do off the bat if you're a young bear and haven't really been taught properly. So some young bears are denied access by larger, stronger bears to good hunting spots, say like a hole in the pack ice. They just don't know the tricks of the trade, and so that leads to juveniles sometimes starving to death. I'm sure there's other reasons too. I can't remember all 11 reasons off the top of my head right now because I'm obviously out in the bush just talking off the top of my head. But other things you can imagine are they found post-mortuary bears that were emaciated had broken teeth, they had a broken jaw, or they had infection in the mouth, or they had cancer, or some disease like that. The other thing about wildlife, why they might starve to death, is because of lack of prey. I mean, if, say, a very, very extremely cold winter happens and there's not a lot of holes in the ice, you know, that's going to affect where the seals go and don't go. And you may find animals, certain polar bears, unable to survive the way they should have through the feeding time of the year, right? Sometimes seal populations are low, sometimes they're high. All animals have natural cycles to their populations that they rise and fall a little over the years, right? So access to food is definitely a big one of it. They've also found that some of the bears in areas that have had the most loss of sea ice are also some of the most successful bears, and that's the Lancaster Sound area. There's a lot of bears. I think the highest population is in that Lancaster Sound area of the Arctic Ocean. So, and it's an area that's been opening up and losing sea ice rapidly for years, and you know, the Northwest Passage, basically, right? Again, we see inconsistencies on how the bears are doing and faring, and what our expectation from climate change should be. In some cases, old age, just physically being unable to keep up, broken bones, broken paws, that, you know, injuries from fighting. So there's a number of ways that a bear could get itself so injured that it's unable to continue on being a successful bear. You know, a good example of this, I say to people, because they're very worried about mountain lions. I always tell them, well, if you got a mountain lion following you, the first thing you do is turn around and fight it. You know, show it that you're willing to fight, and it's not going to stick around, because that cat cannot risk getting kicked in the mouth. It cannot risk losing a tooth. It's death, and it knows it. And I'm sure a lot of cougars have starved to death in their old age, and then people, you know, didn't say, well, the cougars are dying of climate change, or this or that. You know, there's plenty of deer around. Why is this cougar starving to death? Well, there's a legitimate reason. Another thing we found with the bears, I was saying that they seem to be on the move, that they're ranging into different places. You know, we just don't know how climate change is going to affect them. I'm concerned for them. I love them. I think they're a great symbol of the North. I guess another thing about polar bears that I was considering too is just how many climate shifts they've been through. Let's be real that the climate has changed many times, although I think the change that is human caused right now is a very serious and dangerous one. It's not the first time the bears have had to experience massive changes. They somehow survived past the ice ages and the megafauna. They came out on top. They came out on top for a reason. They know how to get by, and they know what to do. They're strong, they're tough, they're smart, they're well adapted. They're a successful animal. Successful animals have a way of continuing to be successful often, right? The humans are also highly adaptable and successful creatures. You see the Inuit, although I guess in terms of the grand scope of history, they haven't been that long in Canadian Arctic. They didn't need a land bridge to get here. They came over just fine. I'm sure that was the case with the very first humans on this continent. They didn't require a land bridge. They knew how to cross a small body of water. Give humans credit. But even for humans, one of the big killers in the Arctic over the years has been starvation, and of course for the white guys, especially scurvy, which is in a sense a form of starvation, vitamin C deficiency. But yeah, people starve to death in the Arctic, and so do animals. It's a very harsh place, and you have to be very, very well adjusted and tough to survive that climate. What's the future for polar bears? I just don't think that it's wise of us to start producing images like that. And even National Geographic retracted that video and produced a different version of it in the end, because they don't know why that polar bear was in the condition he was. How many were in that condition at that time? If there's 3 out of 100 hanging around that don't look really well, you know, the picture just doesn't tell us the whole story, right? So we can't make assumptions, and there's enough hard science on climate change. It's real. It's a real thing. We don't got to make stuff up. If you want to see that video of Joe Stover talking about polar bears, you can look right here. Please subscribe to my channel. I'm on here most days, out in the wilderness now again, talking either about weather or wilderness things. All things Canadiana here on the Joey Only Outlaw Caribou Dude freaking WeatherTube channel.